The Combine called it the vault in the briefing, with a straight face and a rendering, and Mara Teng was the only person in the room who had ever stood at the edge of one of these places and felt it try to take the skiff out from under her. She let the executive finish his pitch. Richest recovery claim in the history of the trade. A region that ingests inheritance components and returns nothing, therefore a region that must contain them, therefore the largest cache of the predecessor's own technology anyone had ever found. And then she put her hand up because somebody had to, and said the true thing, knowing exactly how it would land.
It's not a vault. A vault you can open. I've worked the edge of one of these. It doesn't hold things. It takes them. There's a difference, and the difference is whether your crew comes home.
The executive smiled the smile they trained into them and moved on, because Mara was a field lead with a good record and no stock, and the Combine had already spent more on the survey than her whole life was worth on the open market. The decision was made 3 boardrooms above her. She had known that before she raised her hand. She raised it anyway for the record, the way she put a loss on her own log rather than ship scrap and call it tonnage. 3 years ago, she had been an independent, working sites one component at a time, the slow by-hand way, listening to each unit before she pulled it. Then the Combines undercut her off every bid until she lost her skiff, and Verge hired her off the line because she was good and cheap and out of options. And for 3 years, she had fed a machine built to make her old knowledge obsolete. The machine had decided to eat a kept place, and she was the senior field hand on the expedition, which meant she was the one who would be standing closest when it went wrong. Her crew didn't have stock either. That was the part the boardroom never put in the rendering. The expedition ran on 40 people who would be standing on the breach face when the Combine's bet came due. Riggers, drone techs, a winch crew, kids most of them, taking Combine pay for the same reason she did. Osei, the drone tech who'd run the by-hand recovery with her on the cracked derelict 3 years back and never quite stopped trusting her since, found her on the gantry the first night out and asked the question the whole crew was asking quietly.
The vault. Is it real? The thing they're saying it is.
It's real. It's just not a vault.
She looked at the kid, who had a whole life he thought he was going to keep.
Do your job. Watch my hands, and when I tell the winch crew to stand off, you don't ask why. You just go.
Osei nodded because that was the deal on a Combine crew. You trusted the field lead who pulled by hand over the executive 3 boardrooms away who never had. It was the only protection any of them had, and Mara knew exactly how thin it was, and she spent it on them anyway. She had 4 days on the approach to do something about it, and she spent the first one finding out what the Combine actually knew. The expedition's whole nerve was a single conviction, that the blank regions ingest and retain. Mara did not trust convictions that came prepackaged. The Combine's case arrived wrapped in a confidence interval, a clean curve that put ingestion without return at better than 4 nines across 200 logged events. And a field lead was supposed to read the curve, nod, and rig for tonnage. She read the curve, and then spent the first day of the approach reading it the way she read a derelict before she pulled it. Slowly by hand, distrusting every clean number, asking who had stood out in the dark, dropping things into a blank region 200 times to make a curve that good. Verge hadn't. The Accord hadn't. A number like that comes from somewhere, and she went looking for the somewhere with a trick she'd learned her first month on a Combine line, which maintenance files the company forgot to lock. Mara dug into the survey package and found where the conviction came from, and it was not Verge science. It was bought intelligence, a gray economy source, the kind of thing the Combine's procurement people paid for in cash and didn't log. Somebody out in the networks had been feeding small inheritance components into these places for years and confirming every time that nothing came back. The Combine had bought that pattern and read it as a vault filling up. Mara read it differently. Somebody had been using these places as a hole to drop things into. A hole that fills up is a vault. A hole that takes everything and returns nothing is a grave. And you do not get rich opening a grave. You just join it. She needed ground truth, and the Combine science wouldn't give it to her. So she did the thing a field lead with a conscience and no authority does. She went around the company to the only people who actually knew how these places behaved, because they had been losing crews to them since before the Accord drew the charts. The fixer's name reached her through 3 favors and a debt she'd be paying for a year. Des Calloway met her on a transfer dock 2 systems back along the approach lane, in the dock shadow understatement of someone who survived by being hard to describe afterward, a row of small machine trade rings up one ear catching the light.
You're the Verge lead on the vault job.
Des didn't make it a question.
I wondered who they'd send. Figured it'd be someone who didn't know better. You don't look like someone who doesn't know better.
I need to know what these places actually do, not what the brochure says. What you've seen.
Des was quiet a moment, weighing it, the way the gray economy weighed everything. Then the obliqueness dropped, because it was just them and a problem.
Nothing crosses out on its own, ever. You throw a thing past the boundary, it's gone. Not hidden, not stored, gone. And there's no current, no eddy, no day it washes back. The trade's known it forever. It's why we route around them and don't talk about it twice. And somebody's been using that, a client with deep pockets, paying to drop things in, small components, timekeeping things, one after another, for years, paying for them to be gone, where no one can ever check. I know, because I ran one of those jobs, and I didn't make the drop.
Des showed her the package then, a small inherited component in no category Mara had a name for, with a faint, slow, regular pulse under its housekeeping layer. The kind of pulse the inquiry channels had started whispering about, and the trade had started to be afraid of.
I've carried this for months because the client wanted it gone, unverifiably forever, and I decided a thing somebody pays that much to lose is worth more than the pay. I've been the only person who knew the silences were being used. Now your combine wants to crack one open and pull everything back out. Client wants things lost in there forever. You want them found. You're going to find out the same thing at the same time, and it's going to cost both of you, because you can't own a grave from either end.
Then help me make it fail before it kills my crew. And you stop being the only one carrying that.
Mara asked the question that mattered, the field lead's question, the one about cost.
Your client, the one who's been feeding things in. If I make this fail loud enough that the whole frontier's looking at these places, does that put the bill on you?
Des almost smiled, which on Des was a tell of its own.
My client wanted things gone where nobody could ever check. The Dea Reach inquiry and a combine disaster put a spotlight on every silence on the chart. My client's whole business stops working because you can't hide a thing in a place everyone's staring at. They lose. I've been carrying their leash for months, waiting for a bill out in the dark. You're about to make the dark the most watched place in the galaxy. That's not a bill. That's the end of the debt. So, no, you don't owe me for this. I owe you. Make it loud.
What Des gave her was not a weapon. It was the shape of the thing. Confirmed. From the one layer of humanity that had never been able to lie to itself about the kept places because it had buried too many crews in them. Mara flew back to the ingot with the Combine's whole approach reframed in her head. Not a vault to be opened by the right tool, but a one-way boundary that would do to the expedition exactly what it did to everything else. The instant the breach rig crossed it, and she understood, somewhere over the second day, that she could not argue the Combine out of it. But she might be able to let the Combine's own machine refuse the job, the way an inherited drive core refuses a lien by being made worthless to seize. The Combine's machine was the same machine that had cracked a rich derelict to scrap on her in her first month, because a brute extraction template pulls every component the same way without knowing what it is. That ignorance was its whole danger. It was also, Mara realized, its whole leverage. The template did not know what anything was. It only knew its rules: seat test, value assessment, lean check, abort on no value. The same automated handling logic that governed every site the Combine touched. The logic that protected the company from spending a fortune extracting something worthless. So she taught it that the kept place was worthless. She spent the third day and most of the fourth threading the thing together out of everything the Frontier had learned about these places and never connected. She fed the template the kept place's real behavior as if it were component telemetry, a boundary that returns no handshake, to the template, a site that cannot be seeded, a region that consumes any signal sent into it, to the template, a component that fails its value assessment instantly, a pull on any drive that throws a fix too close, to the template, a handling forbidden seeding hazard, the deep seed fault that destroys clean extraction value. She built the kept place, in the Combine's own logic, into the one thing the corporate machine was constitutionally unable to touch, a site with no recoverable value and a fatal handling flaw, an unseedable lien, a grave the machine itself would refuse to dig for cause of valuelessness. The way a Soul releases a lien rather than make a loss-making collection. It was delicate work, and it was the most herself she had felt in 3 years. The brute template did not take instructions, it took telemetry, and it trusted telemetry the way it trusted nothing human, because telemetry could not lie to it and a field lead could. So she did not argue with the machine. She fed it. She built each false reading the way she'd once built a real one, by hand, getting the units right, the noise floor right, the timestamp staggered the way genuine sensor returns stagger, so that when the template queried the breach site, it would find waiting for it a complete and self-consistent profile of a wreck not worth the fuel to seat. She seeded the value assessment table, so the kept place scored below the abort threshold by a margin too wide to override from a boardroom. She wrote the seeding hazard flag so deep into the handling logic that clearing it would mean rebuilding the template from the keel, which no executive 3 rooms away would authorize in the 4 hours of a flagship breach. Twice she nearly got caught. A throughput auditor's demon woke on the second night and flagged her maintenance session, and she sat in the cold console light with the independent era multi-tool in her scarred hand and her heart going hard, and signed the session off as a pre-breach calibration pass, which it was, technically, which was the only kind of lie she had ever been any good at. The kind that is also true. The demon went back to sleep. She kept working. She did not tell the Combine. She just built it and waited at the edge of the silence with her hand on the hull and her crew at their stations for the order to breach. The order came on the 4th day. The executive gave it from 3 boardrooms away over a clean channel, and the brute armatures reached out toward the boundary, and Mara stood at the port with her hand on the hull and felt the kept place take hold of the rig the way it had once tried to take her skiff. The pull, patient and enormous, an absence that wanted. She had not tested it. That was the thing nobody warns you about, doing the right thing with the wrong tools. There is no rehearsal. She had fed a half-kilometer machine a lie about the dark, and she would find out whether the lie held at the same instant her crew found out whether they lived, and the 2 answers were the same answer. 40 people at their stations, watching the armatures go out. Osei on the winchboard, the executive's clean voice counting down from a room that smelled of nothing. Mara kept her hand on the hull and her face flat and did not let a single one of them see that the field lead did not know, that nobody knew, that she had bet all their lives on a machine being exactly as greedy as the people who built it. The breach rig crossed the boundary, and the Combine's own machine, reading the telemetry Mara had fed it, did exactly what it was built to do when it met a site with no value and a fatal seeding fault. It aborted. The armatures locked. The value assessment flashed the verdict the template flashed on every worthless wreck. No recoverable value, unseedable, abort. And the extraction logic hauled the breach rig back across the boundary and safed it, refusing, for cause of valuelessness, to spend the company's expensive equipment on a grave. The Combine's own greed, made into a rule, made into a reflex, pulled its hand back from the fire a half-second before the fire closed on it. The executive's voice came over the channel 3 boardrooms away, demanding to know why the rig had aborted a flagship breach, and Mara watched her crew at their stations not understand yet how close they had come. Osei was looking at the abort verdict on the winchboard, frowning, working out that the numbers didn't add up. A site doesn't fail a seat test and a value assessment and a handling check all at once. Not unless something fed it all three. The kid looked up at her across the breach deck. Mara held his eyes and shook her head once. Small, the field lead's signal for not now, not ever, do not ask. And Osei, who had watched her hands for 3 years, looked back down at his board and signed the abort off as instrument fault and asked nothing, because that was the deal too. And the kept place answered. It was small, and it was over in a breath, and the only reason Mara caught it was that she had her hand on the hull. When the brute rig crossed the boundary and was hauled back, the silence did the thing the inquiry's recordings had started to whisper about. It stuttered once, a single beat moving through the dark and through the hull and through the bones of her gloved hand. The way a thing that is addressed, loudly or rudely, answers being addressed. Then it was gone, and the dark was just dark again, patient and full and giving nothing back. She did not know what it meant. Nobody would. She logged it as a sensor artifact because that was the only column the Combine had for it, and because she had learned from somebody, somewhere in the trade, that the things you cannot prove, you do not write down as fact. The crew came home, every one of them. The Combine did not see it as a rescue because the Combine did not know there had been anything to be rescued from. To the company, the expedition had simply found that the vault was worthless, an empty claim, a survey error, a write-off, and field leads who deliver write-offs on flagship projects do not stay field leads. They didn't fire her for sabotage. They never knew it was sabotage. They fired her for the abort, for a worthless site, and a wasted expedition, and a record that now had the most expensive failure in the Combine's history on it, with her name as field lead. The arithmetic for once did not back her. She put it on her own log anyway, the way she always had, because the crew was alive and the claim was dead, and that was the trade she had made the day she raised her hand in the briefing. The Combine wiped the survey from its public systems, a flagship embarrassment, buried. But Mara had spent 3 years learning which files the company forgot to lock, and on her way off the ingot, for the last time she kept one thing: the complete site map. Every blank region the Combine had charted across the whole frontier, every silence, the densest cluster, and the one at its center the chart simply left empty. The only full atlas of the galaxy's graves, and nowhere to take it, and no Combine left foolish enough to want it. She sat in a transit lounge with the atlas on her slate, and 3 years of corporate pay run out, and thought about what you do with a map of every grave in the galaxy when nobody who wants it should have it. And she remembered a name: industry folklore, the thing the Combine analysts said the way you say a curse. A contractor who could destroy inheritance value on purpose, who had once made a salvage trick public so no house could own it, who gave dangerous knowledge away deliberately because a thing everyone knew was a thing no one could monopolize. She had filed it under Combine cautionary tales. Now she turned it over and saw it for what it was. The one person on the frontier who had already worked out what to do with knowledge too dangerous to hold and too true to bury.
Row.
She said to the empty lounge, to the atlas, to the row of silences on the slate that someone, somewhere, was about to have to answer. She did not know yet that the man whose name she just said was already pointed at the center of the densest cluster on her map, by an alien who had spent his whole acquaintance aiming him. She only knew that she had a map of every silence in the galaxy, and that the silences had started lately to answer, and that the only sane thing to do with a map like that was give it to the one person reckless enough to knock.